Imagine a narrow pass between rocky mountains and the sea, the suffocating heat of the Greek summer of 480 BC. And then you see something that seems impossible, a dark mass on the horizon advancing slowly. There are thousands, perhaps millions of Persian soldiers marching toward Greece. This is the largest army the ancient world had ever seen, commanded by Xerxes, the king of kings, the ruler of the greatest empire of the time. And all that stands between this overwhelming force and the total conquest of Greece are 300 Spartan warriors and a few thousand Greek allies willing to face the impossible. The story begins years earlier, when Xerxes' father, Darius, had tried to invade Greece and was defeated at the famous Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. That defeat was a humiliation the Persian Empire never forgot. Xerxes grew up hearing about that failure and swore to avenge his father. For years, he prepared an invasion like the world had never seen. He built a bridge of boats across the Hellespont to cross from Asia to Europe. He gathered soldiers from all corners of his immense empire, from Egypt to India. Ancient historians like Herodotus speak of absurd numbers, perhaps exaggerated, of more than 1 million combatants. Even if the real numbers were smaller, it was still an overwhelming force. The Greek city-states were terrified. Most wanted to surrender immediately. After all, how could they resist an army of that size? But the Spartans were different. Sparta was a military society where boys were taken from their mothers at age 7 to begin brutal training that would last a lifetime. They knew nothing but war. For them, dying in battle was the greatest honor a man could have. Surrendering or retreating was unthinkable. It was worse than death. King Leonidas, who ruled Sparta at that time, was about 60 years old when he learned of the Persian invasion. He was an experienced man, a veteran of many battles, and he knew exactly what was at stake. When the Greeks gathered to decide what to do, Leonidas proposed a bold plan. There was a place called Thermopylae, which means the hot gates, named after the hot springs in the area. It was a narrow coastal pass, barely wide enough for a single cart to pass through. The mountains rose steeply on one side, and the sea crashed against cliffs on the other. This was the perfect place to make a stand. In a space that narrow, numbers wouldn't matter as much. The Persians couldn't use their overwhelming advantage. They would be forced to fight in small groups, and that's where Spartan superiority in close combat could make the difference. But there was a problem. Sparta was in the middle of celebrating the Carneia, a religious festival during which warfare was forbidden. The Olympic Games were also taking place, and the Greeks took these religious obligations very seriously. The Council of Elders told Leonidas he could only take his personal bodyguard, 300 men, all of whom had to have living sons to carry on their bloodlines. Everyone understood what this meant. This was a suicide mission. Leonidas was selecting men who could afford to die, men whose families would continue even after they were gone. As Leonidas marched north with his 300, other Greek city-states sent contingents to join them. Thespians sent 700 men. Thebans sent 400, though their loyalty was questionable. Several other cities contributed smaller forces. In total, the Greek force at Thermopylae numbered somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000 men. Still hopelessly outnumbered, but it was something. The plan was to hold the pass long enough for the main Greek army to assemble and for the Greek navy to engage the Persian fleet at sea. If they could delay the Persians for even a few days, it might be enough to turn the tide of the entire war. When the Greeks arrived at Thermopylae, they immediately began preparing their defenses. They rebuilt an old wall that the Phocians had constructed years earlier, creating a fortified position in the narrowest part of the pass. They positioned scouts on the mountain paths to watch for any Persian attempts to flank them. And then they waited. When the Persian army finally arrived and Xerxes saw the small Greek force, he couldn't believe his eyes. Ancient sources say he actually laughed. He sent a scout to observe the Spartans, and the scout reported something bizarre. The Spartans were exercising, wrestling with each other, and combing their long hair. They seemed completely unconcerned about the massive army that had just arrived to destroy them. Xerxes didn't understand what he was seeing, but there was a Greek exile in his camp named Demaratus, a former Spartan king who had been forced into exile. Demaratus explained that the Spartans were preparing for death. Combing their hair was a ritual they performed before battle. They were getting ready to die beautifully, to die as warriors. Xerxes still didn't believe that such a small force would actually fight. He waited 4 days, giving them time to run away, but the Spartans didn't move.
On the 5th day, Xerxes lost his patience. He sent forward his Median and Sicyan troops, ordering them to capture the Greeks alive and bring them before him. These were good soldiers, experienced warriors from the Persian provinces. But when they entered the narrow pass and engaged the Spartans, something terrible happened. The Spartans fought in a phalanx formation, a tight wall of shields and spears. Each man's shield protected the man to his left. Their long spears, called doru, could reach out and strike enemies before the Persians could get close with their shorter weapons. The Persians came in waves, but the narrow pass meant only a few dozen could fight at once, and those few dozen were cut down systematically by warriors who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of combat. The Persians fought bravely, but they were being slaughtered. Bodies began to pile up in the pass. Xerxes, watching from a distance, reportedly leapt from his throne 3 times in fear for his army. He sent wave after wave of troops, but the result was always the same. The Greeks would hold their line, kill dozens of Persians, and when they grew tired, fresh troops would rotate to the front. The Persians had never seen such discipline, such coordination. By the end of the first day, thousands of Persian soldiers lay dead in the pass, and the Greek line hadn't moved an inch. On the 2nd day, Xerxes sent in his elite troops, the Immortals. These were his best warriors, called Immortals because their unit was always kept at exactly 10,000 men. Whenever one died, he was immediately replaced, so the unit seemed immortal. These men were the pride of the Persian army, selected from the best soldiers in the empire. Surely they could break through where others had failed. But the result was the same. The Immortals entered the pass and met the Spartan phalanx. They fought with incredible courage, but courage wasn't enough. The narrow space negated all their tactical advantages. They couldn't flank the Greeks. They couldn't use their superior numbers. They just died, one after another, unable to break the Greek line. Xerxes was desperate now. His invasion was stalled by a handful of Greeks. His army was suffering casualties in the thousands, while the Greeks seemed almost untouched. The reputation of Persian invincibility was crumbling. And then, on the evening of the 2nd day, something happened that would change everything. A local Greek man named Ephialtes came to Xerxes' tent. Ephialtes was from the area, and he knew the mountains well. He told Xerxes about a secret path, a narrow mountain trail called the Anopeia Path that went around the pass and came out behind the Greek position. In exchange for a substantial reward, Ephialtes agreed to guide Persian troops along this path. Xerxes immediately sent his Immortals, under the command of a general named Hydarnes, to follow Ephialtes through the mountains. They marched through the night, climbing through the darkness. The path was guarded by 1,000 Phocian Greeks, but the Phocians had grown complacent after 2 days of inactivity. When they heard the Persians approaching in the pre-dawn darkness, they panicked and fled up the mountainside without putting up much of a fight. The path was open. By morning, the Immortals would be behind the Greek position at Thermopylae. The Greeks would be trapped between 2 Persian forces. Leonidas learned of the betrayal just before dawn. Scouts came running with the news that the Persians were coming through the mountain pass. Leonidas called a council of war. He knew the situation was hopeless now. They could try to retreat, but they would be caught in the open and massacred. Or they could stay and fight, buying more time for Greece, even though it meant certain death. Most of the allied Greek forces were dismissed. Leonidas told them to leave. to go back to their cities and prepare for the next battle. There was no point in everyone dying here. But the 300 Spartans stayed. The 700 Thespians also refused to leave, saying they would not abandon their allies. The 400 Thebans remained as well, though ancient sources suggest they may have been kept as hostages to ensure Thebes' good behavior. As dawn broke on the third day, Leonidas knew this was the end. He led his men out from behind the wall, out into the wider part of the pass. There would be no defensive position now, just open combat. The Spartans fought like men possessed, like men who knew they were already dead and had nothing left to lose. They pushed deep into the Persian lines, cutting down hundreds of enemies. Leonidas himself fought at the front, his red cloak marking him as a target. The Persians recognized him and focused all their efforts on killing the Spartan king. Leonidas fell, pierced by multiple spears. A fierce fight erupted over his body. The Spartans fought desperately to recover their king's corpse, as was their custom. 4 times the Greeks drove the Persians back. 4 times they reclaimed Leonidas's body. But the Persians kept coming, and the immortals were now emerging from the mountain path behind them. The Greeks were surrounded. The survivors retreated to a small hill within the pass, a final defensive position. The Spartans fought with their spears until the spears broke. Then they fought with their swords until the swords broke. Then they fought with their hands and teeth, with rocks and whatever they could grab. The Persians, unwilling to engage these madmen in close combat anymore, stood back and shot them down with arrows. The ancient saying proved true. There were so many arrows in the air that they blotted out the sun. When it was over, every Greek who stayed at Thermopylae was dead. The Persians had won, but at a horrific cost. Estimates suggest they lost anywhere from 10 to 20,000 men, taking a pass defended by a few thousand Greeks. Xerxes was so enraged when he found Leonidas's body that he had the king's head cut off and his body crucified, an unusual dishonor for the Persians, who typically respected fallen enemies. But even Xerxes must have known the truth. Yes, he had won this battle, but he had lost something more important. He had shown the Greeks that Persians could bleed, that they could be beaten. The sacrifice at Thermopylae gave Greece the time it needed. The Greek navy won a crucial victory at the Battle of Salamis, destroying much of the Persian fleet. The following year, the Greek army crushed the Persian land forces at the Battle of Plataea. Xerxes' invasion failed, and he retreated back to Persia in disgrace. Western civilization, Greek democracy, philosophy, art, and science survived because 300 men decided that some things are worth dying for. A stone monument was erected at Thermopylae after the battle. The inscription, written by the poet Simonides, is one of the most famous epitaphs in history. It reads simply, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." These men did exactly what their society asked of them. They knew they were going to die, and they went anyway. They didn't complain, they didn't hesitate, they didn't try to find a way out. They just did their duty. The Battle of Thermopylae has echoed through history for 2,500 years because it represents something fundamental about human courage. It's not about winning or losing. It's about standing for something when it would be so much easier to run. It's about 300 men who looked at an empire and said, "No, you cannot pass." And for 3 days, the greatest army in the world could not pass. Those 300 Spartans, along with their Greek allies, bought time not just for their own generation, but for all of Western civilization. Every time we talk about democracy, about freedom, about the rights of individuals against tyranny, we owe a debt to those men who stood in a narrow pass and refused to yield. Their sacrifice reminds us that sometimes the few can change the fate of the many, that courage is not the absence of fear,
but the decision that something matters more than fear, and that there are moments in history when ordinary people are called upon to do extraordinary things. The 300 Spartans answered that call, and the world has never forgotten.